Good evening. Good early evening. Do you mind if I strip off? I promise to leave it. I'll keep the shirt on and everything. Honestly. Yeah, that's better. Very good. So I'm Will Gompertz, and I'm Cambridge, the good-looking one. So has anybody got a bad sightline into Cambridge?
More importantly, the pictures.
The pictures. So what we're going to do, I think, is we're going to chat about this exhibition and photography and a bit about Cambridge for about half an hour or so, to 40 minutes, and then open it up to the floor and ask us questions, ask him whatever questions you would like. The only snag is I don't have a watch. So Cambridge, hand over.
Do you want the jacket, the shades?
Yeah, I'll have the shades. I will have the shades. They're very groovy.
By the way, I'm going to continually bring it back to Will's new book.
Oh, no, you're
which
not.
is
no,
much more interesting.
Which is not written.
I highly recommend.
Which isn't written. Right, so, okay, Cambridge. And we've got this, which is a trigger of photographs that I think starts with photographs from the show and then goes on to other images that Cambridge taken over time. So there we go. So that's a very good place to start. I've not seen this slideshow. I have seen the exhibition, which is fantastic.
I haven't seen this slideshow.
Really? Well, we're going to have some fun. Well, let's start with this image. And
you know what though, and you do know this because you've interviewed me before, and I have a terrible memory, and this is going to get very embarrassing. Because I actually...
Not for me, it's not Cambridge. It's going to be very relaxing for me.
And I also know that Will, in his interviews, leaves no stone unturned.
No.
So I hesitate to say any of this, but I do genuinely have a very bad memory to do with, I think, traumatic early life stuff, which he will no doubt spend most of the 45 minutes on. But therefore, I can tell you that's... Thank you.
Horrid Henry,
yeah. Francesca, and Stephen, whose books are... Kim, why don't you sit here? This will all work really well. But no, what was lovely about this is they chose these two characters, because most of the way this worked is... Let me start at the beginning, Will. The Story Museum, very flatteringly and very kindly, came to me and said, would you be interested in doing a body of work that would sort of come out as we launched the museum, which must have been about 2 years off at that point. And I said, yeah, I'd love to, but I'm not sure that just shooting 26 authors is that interesting. When I come shoot you for your next book, you'll see. I won't just go. And so anyway, between us, we came up with this idea that what if we just said to them, who was your favourite character when you were a child? What really excited you? What got you going? And so they chose all the people. And then Ginny, who is somewhere in the room, and I'm not putting a hand up, very, very wonderfully went to the Royal Shakespeare Company or the National Theatre and got the costumes. So in a sense, my job, this is unlike all my other...
Yeah.
And I know you and I have discussed this, but in a sense, portraiture is an interesting thing about capturing a subject and the real person. Here, we weren't aiming to capture the real person. We were capturing some imaginary thing they were going to be for the day.
But there is, of course, there is something autobiographical within it, isn't it? Because although they are pretending to be somebody else, their favourite figure from, a fictional story, the way they perform and engage with that, and the way they want to project their own image within that image.
I think that's really interesting.
But did you also find, with people like Francesca, and we'll look at some of the other images as well, that they were liberated? So as opposed to just taking 26 author portraits of depending on what sort of performance you could get out of them, that you were dealing with a completely different animal, somebody you could get a performance out of in this guise that would have been impossible in in street clothes.
That's exactly right, and in a sense it would have been an extraordinary thing. We did video 3 of the shoots, but we never really caught that. That's a really perceptive comment, and the clearest example of it was Philip Pullman. I can't actually see who's in the room, so when I start insulting authors who are in the pictures, just throw things at me. But Philip wasn't very well on the day we did there he is.
That's Long John Silver.
Long John Silver, thank you. You can see how this is going to work.
Yeah. What is so great? Can I just butt in here? What is so great about this? Cambridge got a useless memory, I think we've established that. But Cambridge Jones isn't his real name.
Oh no, we're not on that one already.
We'll come to that in a minute. But he has to continually remember what his real... Of all the people to have a nom de plume, this is the wrong man. Anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. Philip.
So Philip, when he arrived, very kindly and obviously, and he's a great supporter of the museum and a wonderful man in every way, but he wasn't very well on this day. And the place we'd chosen to shoot in was up about 58 flights of stairs, as you will discover when you start wandering around the Story Museum. It is a big place. And that was just to get the costume sorted. But the point you're making is absolutely germane, and exactly what happened is that he literally wasn't well, and he sort of sat down and we did the makeup. But by the time this stuff was on, it may have been in this room actually, we actually did the shoot. You couldn't stop him. He was like, and that, so your point is absolutely right, that something gives them the freedom to perform. Because, and you're a writer, but writers are creative people and they're used to being creative, but they're not necessarily used to putting themselves out there. But the costumes and the stuff that Ginny collected was just gave them this amazing freedom. And it was for me it was one of the most lovely jobs to do, not only because of what the Story Museum does and who they were working with, but there's that creative process.
How did it change the way you approached taking the photograph? Were you, normally, of course, we'll talk about this in a minute, one assumes you're trying to draw something of that personality out, which is unique to that moment.
Yeah.
But here, they're pretending to be a much-loved children's character.
Yeah.
So what were you trying to do to capture, to bury Philip Pullman behind Long John Silver, or to bring Philip Pullman out of Long John Silver?
So there's actually a second set of portraits, which if you ever go into the room behind here, you'll see some of, which is them getting ready. And
Yeah.
I think that's when I was interested in the real Philip Pullman and the real Michael Morpurgo and so on. And you can see there is sort of, there's a relaxedness about them because they're being, the makeup's being put on and so on, but there is a fear as well. But by the time I get to that, to answer your question, I've actually dispensed with Philip Pullman by then, completely, and I just need Long John Silver. And if I'm not seeing Long John Silver, then my way of photographing is not to direct too much. But if it's not working, then I might suggest something. And you'll hear me endlessly say, there's lots of photographer jokes, but and one of them is you stand there going, "It's lovely, it looks lovely, lovely." But the one I always use is, "Why don't just try this, just try this, just try this," and that's how I edge them into. Because if I say to you, "Right, well, I want you to sit on the back of the chair, put your feet," you're kind of going, "Whoa, am I doing it right?"
Tense up. Yeah.
But if we somehow work towards it together, and somehow you feel that was your idea, that's much better, and you have less self-consciousness, I think, than being told to do something that you're not sure whether it's right.
But it's always. I was talking to a photographer called Nick Knight. Has everybody heard of Nick Knight? He's quite a well-known fashion photographer. Oddly, when he takes a photograph of a model for the front page of Vogue, their sales go up 10%. It's extraordinary. It really is. He's an amazing man.
Because he's done it.
Yeah, and he said that, and we were talking about Kate Moss, the model, and what made her so great. And he said what people don't realise is the models. People think the models are stupid or whatever. He said they're not. They're actually very good actors, and the best models know how to tell the story of the clothes they're wearing.
Yeah.
So he described Kate Moss as a brilliant narrator. It's interesting.
It is interesting, and actually, they're better than actors. I would guess one would expect that, but actors aren't always very good at being photographed. Interestingly, but that's something to do with. That's a whole different thing about the difference between a still image. If I video you while I'm talking to you, I suspect most people are a lot less unnerved by that than the minute I pick up my camera and point it at you, and that sends the fear of God into people. And we're talking about people who are in the limelight all day and all night every week, and might be,
but they're playing a character.
In your case, so you're on TV a lot and you have a camera pointed at you. So, but lots of people are like that. But the minute I put a still camera at you, the brain sort of goes, "Oh my God, you're trying to freeze a moment."
In my experience, normally the camera breaks.
But I think the brain goes, which moment do you want? Am I giving you the right moment? Or is my eye going to be shut?
But there must be a frustration, with some of these. Let's just Michael Morpurgo, for example, was a wonderful man.
Yeah.
And very easy, who I would assume plays up to the camera and actually understands, the whole. A lot of these authors, of course, children's authors, do lots of public speaking, and they're used to performing, aren't they?
Yeah, but in my experience, they weren't. That's okay. So let's separate. There's two things going on. I think one is that are they or are they not used to performing, and then the other is their human brain freezing because I'm pointing a camera at them. And for different people, one or another might override it. Interestingly, Michael is actually quite good at acting, but I would never have guessed that from talking to him in the green room or whatever before when we're getting ready. But he did come in with the whole kind of attitude and the pork pie and the chains but I don't know, and I haven't seen him speak publicly, but maybe he can do that. But most of them didn't. I think for me it was the costumes and the props that essentially takes you back to childhood and that freedom of... I shoot a lot of actors and talk to them a lot about acting and indeed trained myself in that world. But I think the best acting is essentially when you feel like a 6-year-old in the playground playing cowboys and Indians. And I think that's what he did. He just went for it and it was fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did an interview with Simon Callum. He said exactly that. He said he was a rubbish actor until he lost all his inhibitions.
Yeah.
It was only at that moment when
fun.
he stopped thinking about being an actor or acting that you lose, and you're free.
Yeah.
You can really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Obviously, what we all want to know is.
By the way, which I never did, because I went to RADA and they thought that my entire time there, they thought I was there taking photographs for the Sunday Times because I just kept shooting everything.
Yeah, you're probably at the wrong school. You should probably gone to photography school.
Should have asked your advice.
Which of these images did you most enjoy taking? Which do you think is the most?
Love that.
That's a great image.
She came in on her birthday.
Just who is she?
Oh, come on.
Holly.
Bit more?
Holly
Smale.
She's a YA or...
I know them all. I love them all, Will. I just don't do names. So Holly Smale came in on her birthday, which was very kind, from London. Spent a long day here. And sort of those of us who were here at the time, Kim was here, Ginny was here, I think Honor was here. In fact, I think I shot Honor on the same day, possibly. But the point was that she came in looking kind of off the street, rough. You know, really, I was up late last night, I've got my birthday tonight. But then, by the time she'd done this, and those who were there will remember it, she became a presence in the room. And did you get to see the room?
I did, it's a great room, yeah. It's quite a big room she's been given.
Yeah. And that lovely through the wardrobe stuff. So, no, she was a joy to shoot. And again, I would not have known it from... but here, going back to your other point, she was a model. So she knew
how to pose.
Yeah. And it is very different to acting. I take the point earlier, but I actually think it's an almost different thing that... I don't know whether they do know what the narrative is. I think they know how to hold something long enough for you to get it and then change it in case you didn't like it. And somehow, along the way, it's very hard. Talking about photography is a very bad idea.
You're doing a very good job, then.
Whatever you do, it sounds pretentious.
Not remotely pretentious. How long did this image take to create? What is once you start shooting to the moment you stop shooting, is there a moment within that you know you've got the shot, but you carry on because it took 2 seconds, it'd be embarrassing, it looked that easy. And when you go back to it and you look at the contact sheet, is it completely clear to you which is the shot? So there's 3 questions there. Really.
I'm wondering the same about you and your reporting on everything. It's just so easy. No, so in this case, in some cases you struggle until you get it, and there are particular shots even in here, and if it comes up I'll mention it, but I don't think I should pick it out randomly.
Well, let us do it for you. Please tell me when to stop.
We're back to the beginning, aren't we?
No, we'll find it.
It may not be here. They may have taken it out. It was that good. There. No, yes, there. So
Kim? Cressida Cow.
Hi, Cressida.
Yeah.
The thing, I was struggling to get Peter Pan in this shot. See, I remembered who it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's one I really did struggle, and I'm not sure I pulled it off in the end. And we tried some trick photography of having her flying over Christchurch and all sorts to try and resurrect the fact I hadn't really caught it. I think that's okay, but it's kind of a pirate rather than Peter Pan in a way. Whereas going back to the original one we were on with the Ice Queen, the answer is I got it very quickly.
Mm.
But it was so nice and so easy to shoot that I carried on shooting for another hour.
How interesting.
Because it was just fun to shoot.
And then when you look at the contact sheet,
So I think that's and again that's slightly different in this to normal portraiture, but you do this thing when you meet somebody, or in this case, you form a mental image of what the thing you're trying to capture is, and you work towards it,
mm-hmm.
and then when you're editing, you basically match the two. You match your mental image, what you feel you've met, and you go, that's it, and that's it, that's completely wrong. And incidentally, that has got nothing to do with how good they may look. They may look absolutely brilliant here, but they're not. It's not Will, or it's not Peter Pan, or whatever it is, so that goes out.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people, particularly in the modern world of retouching and stuff, think photography is just all about making you look superb. But to me, it isn't. I'm much more old-fashioned. I'm much more interested in capturing the character in front of me, whether it's Peter Pan or Will Gompertz.
So here's the question, isn't it? So we know about painting, and painting is really difficult, isn't it? Painting is really difficult.
I find that
do you know
really
where this
easy.
is going? And yet everybody thinks they can photograph, because everybody's got a camera. I mean, literally, everybody's got a camera. We've now probably got 4 or 5 cameras, on our person in different ways, shapes and forms. And we take a photograph, and we then edit ourselves and decide which ones are good, and sometimes we might print them out or whatever it might be. What is the difference between the personal snap, which, and the professional photograph, and is it something which is entirely, I suppose, sort of intuitive or God-given or what it might be, or do you need to go off to university to do 3 years training?
Okay,
be honest.
Yes, I'll be honest, but I think you may need to stop me at some point and go, let's get back to something interesting, because I could get quite profound about this, and I could indeed, and pretentious possibly, some people might say, but I think it does refer right back to your book, genuinely in this case.
Nobody knows about this book.
So anybody who doesn't know it's on sale afterwards, and I highly
this book.
recommend
Yeah. It's terribly good. First page of the last. It's not
So for a moment there, I thought we might have found some modesty in it, but apparently, no, that's not. No, but your notion, which I think you do rather brilliantly in your book, about, you skirt round the what is art question, modern art, and in the end you duck it and say, well, the time will tell, don't you? In a sense.
Oh, the art that's made now?
Yeah.
I think it's more fun if people make their own minds up.
Yes,
Yeah.
And in a sense I feel that about photography, and I say that partly, but here's one answer to it, which is the difference between, and you don't have to do this on purpose, but the difference between what I think is a great photograph and just a snap is partly formed by, 150 years of photography and what's come before, and I don't know to what degree that's true in art.
So you have you've steeped yourself in the history of photography, and you have an academic knowledge of where it started.
Not academic, but yes,
you've taken a sort of semi-scholarly attitude.
Yeah, and I love looking back. But here's the problem for me, and it slightly bounces back to some things you say in your book. There is a current trend in photography, and if you go to the Portrait Prize at the National Portrait Gallery every year, you'll see it, and it's kind of disturbingly close to the snapshot. And there's not only that, there's
sort of the informality.
Yeah, the kind and not really caring about the structure and the tones and the contrast and anything. And actually, and you add to that another thing that's currently in the zeitgeist, which is, how miserable can we make people look? And I just have a terrible time. Do you know the things I mean? They kind of have people looking really forlorn. And that's a great portrait at the moment. And I'm not interested in that. I think portraiture through painting, through art generally, and sculpture and painting, and one of its roles, and is unashamedly so, has been to see the best in people. So I find it a very odd little blip in time where we're just celebrating ugliness.
So what happens when, if that's your raison d'être, that you want to bring out the most vital part of somebody, the best part of somebody? What happens when it must happen when you encounter somebody you don't actually like very much?
There are very few I've not liked, genuinely. And one of the reasons for that is I live a very privileged life where for a very short period of time I get to go and talk to somebody almost as an equal on the basis that you know, if I was commissioned to shoot you and I'd never met you, essentially our preoccupation for an hour and a half becomes how we're going to get the best shot of you. Now, even if you were a nasty person or whatever, you wouldn't use that hour and a half to show it to me. It just wouldn't be in your interest. So I've not very. It's very rare I haven't liked people. There are one or two.
Would we like to know?
Kevin Spacey is not my favourite subject.
What? That's interesting. What went wrong?
He did a... Are you here, Kevin? He did a thing which was to sort of... kept me waiting, didn't really get prepared.
What was the commission about?
It was a commission for the Prince Charles book we did on people and their favourite songs. So for his charity, Prince's Trust.
Okay.
And I think that's right. And the idea was that we do your portrait, and you pick a song that's inspired you at some difficult point in life or helped you get through something. So, you know, he'd agreed to do it. I was there to get the best shot I could. He just wouldn't. He just delayed and delayed, didn't come. When he did come, he kind of looked like he made no effort. He wouldn't accept any makeup. And then halfway through, he just... I'm glad we're recording this and putting it online. It really helped me in my career. He basically just cut it and just said, right, you got it. And that was it. He was off. Okay, and then that's the beginning. And then, once I produced the work I was best able to do, he said, well, couldn't we retouch this and this? It's like, well, if you'd have got ready and made... we wouldn't have to be doing that. But anyway, for all the Kevin Spacey fans in the room, he's a great actor. He's just not a great portrait subject.
But we're in the story museum, and although you deal in the medium of a still image, you are looking, are you not, to tell a story?
Yes, or at least to give clues to a story. I think not. I don't think I pretend to tell a whole story, but I think the things you see are meant to allude to a. Well, that.
Just because it's there, local MP and all that.
But this is a very particular exhibition.
So there literally is a story.
Well, so this is interesting because this has never been seen. This is an exhibition which has been shot. I think it's the only thing I've ever done, a body of work that's never been exhibited. And the reason it was never exhibited is it was called Out of the Shadow, and it was his idea, and we worked the idea up, and the idea was, as they were about to, in the ascendancy, returning to...
Is he Prime Minister at this stage?
Just about to be.
Uh-huh.
And so the idea was we'd shoot all the well-known Conservative politicians from Mrs. Thatcher through to him, literally, all of the Prime Ministers and the Chancellors and all the rest of it. And each one has their favourite piece of oratory. So it's not political necessarily. His is Shakespeare's... Will memory, come on.
Shakespeare's writing. Henry V, yeah.
Thank you. Can you tell that from there? Very good. So all of them have this.
That was very good, actually.
Yeah, that is impressive.
A round of applause, don't you think?
Can we turn this into a game show? And a panelist on the right. Anyway.
How interesting that's how he sees himself.
Yeah. And so we shot them all, and we literally from Thatcher through to him, and they all have this shot. And then, of course, they didn't win the election. It became a hung parliament.
Yeah.
And they didn't really feel they could celebrate by having an exhibition called Out of the Shadow. And so the play was on shadow government, shadows, words, and all that. What was the question?
Well, the question was you trying to get
Tell
a
it,
story.
yeah.
So what were you trying to capture of this well-known MP, but not a international statesman as he now is as the Prime Minister of Britain? What were you trying to capture about him? What story were you trying to tell? And then how did you go about eliciting that from him? You just turn up your camera and press.
No. I just so I knew him anyway. Because I'd studied politics and economics with him.
I know the answer to this.
That's his missus. This is Cambridge's wife, by the way.
How to devise this thing? I think the speech was a way of showing the human side of these very public, because he was new. We were going back to much well-known politicians, and I think it was to show a side of them that wouldn't have been known by the choice of their speeches. My husband's got a bad memory.
There's a great song called, which I recommend, called "I Got a Bad Memory," you know, a bad thingamy, you know.
yeah.
But I think the other thing about it is I wanted, like Cherie Blair actually, he's somebody who isn't easy to capture in public, and yet.
Mask, there's a mask.
I think it's involuntary. I think it's a way they cope with the exposure, and something takes over their body. In Cherie's case, it's her mouth, and she can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And in his case, it's a sort of stern gentleman thing. And I wanted to catch the younger boy in him, which I'm not sure is there, but there are other shows. There are other photos in that did capture that. So I think I wanted to show the more accessible side of him.
I was talking to another portraitist, but a painter, a guy called Jonathan Yeo, at a festival, and he was
he's great.
He's terrific, but he was saying for him one of the most annoying things of the modern age, being a portraitist, is Botox.
Right.
Really. He said with Botox, he just finds it very difficult
to get anything,
to get any animation out of the face, and actually now he will actually check before taking commission whether the person uses or doesn't use Botox.
Please fill in this form.
Don't you think? But
he uses lots of photographs.
He works in photographs, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But have you ever encountered an issue with somebody where you just can't get an expression which is interesting? You can't make them feel, as you say, you're trying to get out of the camera in a certain look. They're, for whatever reason, Botox or otherwise, they are kind of their face is dead almost. It's a mask.
Well, one of the things I'm working on next, and at the moment, and Paul, who's in the audience, is working on this with me and making a film, is on country singers in Nashville.
Yeah.
And country music has been around for some time, and some of those legends are quite old, and they live in America. So you can imagine there's some work being done.
Yes, Kenny Rogers, etc. Yeah.
And that is quite hard if your style of photography is essentially old-fashioned and not particularly predisposed to doing lots of retouching and stuff. So in America, that is an issue. Joan Collins, I thought I would have this problem with, and didn't. So if she's had work done, it's done very well. I mean, this was when I shot her, which is over 10 years ago. But I was fully expecting to go to Joan Collins and A, find that issue quite difficult, and B, I'd been told that she was very controlling, and she would tell me that light can be there, but that one can't be there. And I'd had none of that. She was an absolute joy. Yeah.
How do you get commissions? I mean, how do you get the commission to photograph Joan Collins or David Cameron or whoever it might be? Where do they come from?
An awful lot of mine, which is I'm sure why we're sitting here in a sense, an awful lot of mine have... my very first exhibition was called Face the Music. And
the Proud Galleries.
The Proud Galleries.
Yeah.
You should be the BBC Arts. Fantastic. And one of the oddities of that was that it just... So the gimmick in it was, if you like, I'm looking at your portrait, but I hear your favourite bit of music.
Yeah.
And then I move on to the next one and I hear that favourite bit of music of the subject.
And so you have headphones on also.
And you have headphones on.
Yeah.
And the thing that happened to my career, that was my first big exhibition, and it just took off in the media, and there were 8 pages in the Observer, and I was suddenly on BBC Breakfast News and so on. But because of that, I've basically had a commission after commission after commission of quite interesting bodies of work, more often than single one-offs for. There is a set. Now the truth is that that's not as well paid as when somebody comes and says, "Will you do Madonna on this PC laptop?"
Yeah,
and you get an absolute fortune for that.
How much? It's interesting to know, isn't it? You know, young people in the audience thinking about careers.
Well, the truth is, it's gone down and down and down. Oddly,
but a major celebrity.
So a major celebrity on that you could get, depending on if it was Madonna, it'd be an awful lot. But it's somewhere between £20,000 and £100,000 just for doing the same shot. That if you were doing it for a charity calendar, you'd probably be paid £500.
Wow.
So it's not. It's really photography is all about usage. It's not. The oddity of the business model of photography is it's not about what you do, it's about who you do it for. It's
and where it's
going to be seen,
yeah.
and what we call usage. And my agent's job is to kind of not only get the job, but then to work out what they're going to do with it. Is it going to be used in advertising? Okay, well then he costs this much. Is it going to be used for your mantelpiece? Well then it costs this much. That's a really sort of sordid world which I don't have to get involved in. But the truth is it's gone down and down and down. So an album cover that would be £20,000 to do a day's work on 10 years ago would genuinely... I remember a series of time where every time I did an album cover, it was worth half what the last one was.
The weirdest thing, I had the same with haircuts. the more hair falls out, the more it costs me to get the bloody thing cut. Extraordinary. Anyway, sorry. And that's a little aside. Nothing to do with photography. Yeah.
But it's just so the same job that once cost 20,000 might well be offered you for £2,000 now.
How do you go from being... Okay, let's just get this out. Paul Barrow.
Who?
Paul Barrow?
Never heard of him. You've got a memory problem.
Yeah. So how do you go from being Paul Barrow, who was studying to be an actor, to Cambridge Jones, celebrity photographer? What was...
I think
what was that journey?
Firstly, you do it once and fail. So I did it straight after university. I tried to be a photographer.
So you wanted... What made you want to be a photographer?
I get talked to a lot by people who want to be my assistant or want to come and... I had one day before yesterday, a girl who's studying A-level photography and wanted to come and talk to me, and I, as much as I can, I do it. And I sort of said to her, it's not something you can work out. It's a passion. I just love photography. Yeah. And one of the oddities of my life is I meet lots of interesting celebrities and so on, but that isn't what interests me, and it genuinely isn't. I like meeting interesting people. But I'm only happy if I'm taking good photographs of them, oddly. But so to me, it's all about the photography. And all I can say is if you want to be a photographer because you think you're going off to study... I've seen studying photography kill the passion for people again and again and again.
So should people study photography or not?
I don't think they should, or acting. I mean, I've seen the same
thing. Done that as well. Yeah. So you were here, weren't you? You were at Oxford.
I was at Oxford originally,
yeah.
Doing politics.
Doing politics with...
Yeah.
Dave. And then you had a go at being a photographer and failed. Why?
So good. So this comes back to thank you for keeping me on track. So originally I did it, and I ended up doing my mum's friends and cats and dogs, and I just thought this isn't where my passion for photography is. No. I'd rather wander around Ethiopia and snap away, but nobody wants to pay me for that. So I came back to it sort of several years later. And the answer to your question is I basically took a calculated marketing stance, and I said, look, nobody's going to pay you any... I've tried it didn't work. I'm going to come in all guns blazing. I'm going to do an exhibition. My first exhibition was at the Proud Galleries, which is sort of unheard of.
Yeah, the Proud Galleries is a big gallery in London, if you don't know, which has lots of top-notch photography exhibitions.
And you can't really have your first exhibition there. But I did two things. At least. One is I invented the most pretentious name I could think of, so that they would pay attention and not forget it.
And why? What were the inspirations?
As a kid, I'd grown up in Cambridge and Wales, and I reclaimed Wales in the Jones and Cambridge in the first name. And I also thought...
Did you try it on the missus? Did you give it the missus test?
I tried it on lots of people, and everyone said no. On no account, do that. And then a BBC person, actually. Have you ever come across Carenza Jennings in your travels? I was having a dinner with Carenza, and she said, well, if you just do it, and if you're going to do it tonight, and wake up tomorrow and do it. And so I did it. So that was that.
And did you change? Were you a different person in your own mind to a certain extent, this persona you took on?
Well, one of my daughters is here tonight, and I remember when I used to leave the house in Oxford, that they could tell whether or not I was Cambridge Jones by what I was wearing. And they'd go, oh, you're Cambridge today.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not today. So, yes. But the other half of it was, the reason I ended up at the Proud Gallery wasn't really to do with my pictures, actually, if I'm honest. I mean, I hope that I wouldn't have stood the test of time if the pictures weren't good.
Yeah.
But the truth is, I had the ridiculous name, and I came up with this idea of this Face the Music, and furthermore, I contacted everyone I knew. It's a good job I didn't know you at the time, because I would have contacted you, and just said, can I photograph you or somebody you know that would be well enough known to help my exhibition? And so when I then went to the Proud Gallery, I had 120 interesting people and their favourite song, and I had a ridiculous name. So in a sense, it's a sort of marketer's dream. And he kind of had to go, who the hell are you? But yes, we will do it, because it's a really good idea. But I hope that somewhere along the line, people like the photos, because they came back and asked for more And I did a book on 100 actors for RADA,
Yes.
who again had seen me train there and thought he's a photographer. Eventually decided they might as well use me as a photographer.
There's a huge risk of getting into some cod psychology here, so for which I apologise. But you know, clearly the reason you take great photographs is because you have a great rapport with people. You're interested in people. You can't take great photographs of people if you don't care about them. They would be dead.
Which is why people shouldn't just go and study for 5 years.
Exactly,
They should
it's experience life.
people, yeah.
But also this, obviously what's absolutely central to the whole notion of portraiture is a sense of identity. Not only the identity of the subject, but the identity of the photographer, of the portraitist. You know, you can't see a Lucian Freud painting of somebody and not know it's Lucian Freud. These are autobiographical works to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Does part of this drive, this desire to explore the ego, what the person is, go back to this childhood of yours, which was, well, peculiar is an understatement, isn't it?
I remember being on Will's radio show and in passing...
Radio Oxford every Sunday morning, absolutely cracking, 2 hours, 9 to 11, all welcome.
I remember in passing saying something about, and when I was kidnapped as a child at 2.5, and then carried on, and he went, whoa, hold it! We're just, and I think that's what you're referring to.
It is what I'm referring to, yeah.
And so I did have this very, and there's 2 of my uncles are in the room, I think. And
so what happened, just so we know?
so what happened is that my mother and father got married in Oxford and had a pretty disastrous relationship. And at some point a nanny was brought in to sort of look after me while they fought or imploded or whatever they were doing. And the nanny, I think, took... Maybe some people in the room can give me more information than I have, but this is, as I understand it, the nanny basically kidnapped me, and the police were trying to find me, and were eventually called to the Isle of Wight because she'd gone to her mum's house and taken me, I think with the best of intentions, you know, we'll just get him...
But she wasn't going to give you back, she was...
None of that do I know, not least because I then went to live with my mum's sister, aged 2.5, where I spent the rest of my life, in Wales and Cambridge. See how we did that?
Yeah, very good, yeah, slick, yeah.
And so your question is, and that is certainly, I think, why my memory is not great. I think I have this sort of strange whiteboard of a memory where you tell me something today and my brain just involuntarily wipes it out because it might be painful in some way. If you suddenly wake up and you've got new mothers and fathers the next day, I think it's probably quite helpful to go, well, I didn't have any before, so that's all good. And I think that may be why I've got that weird memory. But whether, in so much as it relates to identity, I've been asked this, you know, you say it's called psychology. Psychologists do ask me this every time I ever sit near one at a dinner table. They're absolutely right, they hone in on it. And I don't think it is that. I mean, I'm very interested in psychology and I'm very interested in people. But I think it was a much more calculated marketing, the Cambridge Jones identity, than that. But in so much as it relates to other people, I think it's more basic. It's back to your other point. I'm just genuinely fascinated by meeting and talking to people and understanding what makes them tick and what make. So the very first exhibition, I genuinely wanted to know what people's favourite song was. I think that's quite interesting. It starts telling you stuff. But just you're absolutely right. You can't take a good picture without somehow connecting with people. And it's Patrick Litchfield.
That's me, though.
Yeah, you see that?
You got something going with him, haven't you? That's a little boy you wanted, is it?
That's one of the country singers. Well, I missed which was the little boy? Oh yeah, the little boy. Yeah. So that's another country. He's a younger country singer. That's not facial work.
You like? Music's a big thing to you.
Huge.
So you've talked about using it as a way in the Proud galleries.
Yeah. And
other times, and now taking portraits of musicians.
Yeah.
What's the attraction for you?
So the 3 things I do mainly are politicians, actors, and musicians primarily. And the difference with musicians and the other 2 is an understanding of the creative contract that we have together to make something interesting and creative and different. So the minute they walk into the room, there's an agreement that they might swing from the light bulbs or they might stand on the edge of that very day.
Is this preconceived? Do you go in there with some ideas?
No, I tend not to,
Uh-huh.
because I really like the idea of working with you to get what's best. Partly because, back to your point, I think it comes out of your character. I'm working with you and who you bring to the room that day.
Yes.
I have tried. I remember, funny enough, with Bill Nye, the one with the actor with the big saucepan. I tried with Bill Nye and an actor called Andrew Lincoln. To do a shoot that Bill really, really wanted to do because he thought it was funny. And it was, I don't know whether anyone remembers the Morecambe and Wise sketch where they used to sit in the bed in pyjamas, sort of literally together in their pyjamas and talking.
Yeah.
And he thought it would be, they were shooting Love Actually at the time, and Andrew Lincoln and him became very good friends and are to this day, and they thought it would be great to do a Morecambe and Wise sketch. And anyway, we spent about 2.5 hours preparing the set for this.
And did you ever believe in it?
No.
No.
And I don't think they did. And the great thing was, just as I kind of said, let's just do something else, Bill said, what about that? And he pointed at a kid's motorcycle rocking thing that was about as big as this table.
Yeah.
And the portrait I did use in the end is Bill Nye on a motorbike, which is just great. And that's because it's come out of Bill's humour and what he's seen in the moment. And so it's not me planning or them planning. I just think planning in photography is to... And this goes back to I would much prefer to do less well-paid creative work than the stuff that's very highly paid, because you've got 100 people saying, my job's to do the background, my job's to do the makeup, my job's to do the whatever it is. And
yes.
You actually lose creativity. What was wonderful in this job, and working with Ginny particularly, is we just had a very fluid, creative kind of approach to it all. So we kind of didn't... Ginny would do a bit of research on what the character was, and I would do no research.
So just looking at your photographs of Cambridge, yeah, yeah, so the research.
No, but then really we just let what would happen happen. In a sense, it was what do they bring to the table? They want to be this character, so what are they? What's their image of it? Where do they want to take? Now, of course, Ginny had often had a conversation with them already, so she knew a bit where they were coming. I often didn't know, because that's part of my thing. I don't want to research it. I want to just work with you on the day. Rhys Evans, 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, comes into my studio. I said, do you want a coffee, Rhys? He goes, pint of beer would be good. And continue the day in that manner. But that was a shoot with...
That's a great shot.
Who's the... Thank you. Who's the Welsh drug dealer? Howard Marks.
Yeah.
So Howard Marks came by as well.
Really? So them all there, did he?
By the end.
Sounds quite a day.
It was quite a
What was
day.
your-
Because basically they were kind of, oh yeah, I remember when you did that. And Rhys had just played him the reason he came by is Rhys Evans had just played Howard Marks in the movie of Howard Marks' life. And so they were, and in the end I just completely gave up this notion of directing. I basically shot these two sitting around smoking and drinking, and it was great. It had this kind of really odd atmosphere because it was in a white background, but they're sort of sitting, oh, it was a lovely day that one, wasn't it?
Is this one of 100 snaps quickly taken digitally, or is this something which is entirely composed, considered?
It's a bit of both. There will be a lot taken, and
where are you? Where are you physically in this?
I am more or less where the front of the audience is, but with a longish lens.
Yes.
And low. I'm at his height, and I've got an assistant sort of sorting out the lights because I'll say, look, there's a shadow on him there. Can you just move that one? Which essentially leaves me free to shoot with them. And there'll be a makeup person running around, which is pointless with Rhys Evans because he's not going to do whatever you want, but there will be one there. That's it. So the answer to your question, so this notion that digital photography means you take loads of pictures is true in the wider world, but the truth is professional photographers have always shot. We basically went through film like this.
Yeah.
So I would have always taken lots of pictures.
Yeah.
And if you Cartier-Bresson, who is famous, he's one of my favourite photographers, and I'm sure lots of you know who he is, great French photographer, but particularly famous for the phrase, the decisive moment. When asked about what photography was, it's about the decisive moment. About 8 years ago maybe, an exhibition and a book came out called Cartier-Bresson's Scrapbook. Now, Cartier's Bresson scrapbook is a wonderful book, and I highly recommend anyone to look at it, but it slightly takes away the notion of the decisive moment, because the man jumping the puddle or anything was shot 7 or 8 times.
Yeah, really.
And then he goes, that one.
It was staged.
Not staged, but it isn't. I think the romantic notion everyone took out of Cartier-Bresson is, you as a photographer,
Or the
you know the moment.
Yeah.
That's the decisive moment.
Yeah.
I am a genius.
Yeah.
But then you see a scrapbook and you go, well, he just like the rest of us. He knows what he's after, but he's taking. And he is one of my favourite photographers. So I'm trying to debunk photography, not him. I mean, he is a genius.
So what is the difference between a good portrait and a poor portrait? In general, and when it comes to your own work, when do you know? What is that difference? How do we know a good portrait from a bad portrait? I look at that. That's a good portrait.
I think part of it is being arresting. It will make you want to look at. But I would say want to look at them rather than the picture. Oddly, I know when it's good because I've brought out the interesting side. It's not, as I said, it's not about being beautiful. Though it can be, but it's something interesting that makes you stop and want to know more, or gives you clues about them and their life. And I don't plan it, I just know, by meeting you, I sense it, and then I try and capture it, and then when I'm editing it, I know that's it. And
does the customer have to accept that? Because you say you as a creative person have gone through the process, you've made the decisions, and that's the final edit, that's what you're getting, that's the shot.
That's a really interesting one, and that is a world that's changing, even in my lifetime of doing this. And in America, if you deal with any celebrity,
they get picture approval.
They're going to try and get picture approval, and that's a big problem. If you believe the creative process is as I just described it, because a major part of the creative process is the editing, and I want that choice. Yes. And so if Al Pacino says, well, you can use, and the way I get around it is I basically allow them to narrow it down in America. So I won't give them, or because there's versions of it, so they will try and choose it. That's not allowable. Picture approval in the sense that I will choose it and they okay it can be okay, because on the whole I don't think I've picked stuff that they didn't want to.
So we've already established you don't want to make them look bad.
I'm not trying to make them look bad, and they sort of know that my reputation means I probably aren't stitching people up. But my favourite bit is if they're really going to push it, is they can sort of select. It's not my favourite. My favourite is to be left alone. And actually, funnily enough, we had this in the Story Museum, and this is no disrespect to the Story Museum. It's a problem that it exists for photographers, and they weren't to know that. But we started early on to give people the photos from the session. Yes. And we realised quite quickly that this wasn't a good idea, because by showing opinions, they thought they had the right to sort of tell us what we should use, and so we quickly sort of pulled back on that one. Though I don't think any bad decisions ended up over it, but I do remember early on that something like that happened.
Now, I said I talked to Reese Cambridge.
Hello everyone! Pint!
For half an hour, 40 minutes. I've been chatting for 50 minutes, so sorry about that. Who would like to ask Cambridge a question?
Can I suggest something? And I mean, it's absolutely unflatteringly, I'm not trying to... Yeah. But I think there's a wonderful overlap between Will's work and his book, and so I would suggest that you open it up to both of us about art and you don't. What did you say?
Nobody wants to ask me a question.
Well, I'm going to have a bit of quiet time now while you're asking questions.
No.
What is photogenicity in the sense that somebody has looked at Kate Moss and said, you could photograph her and get a wonderful picture? What is that?
Well, Kate Moss, I think, and maybe I'll get shouted down for this, but I think she's a really interesting one, because I think, and this happens with actors as well, part of this, I think, is a genuine process of familiarity and repeat exposure. I think people think Kate Moss is as beautiful as she is, partly because they've been shown that. I'm not convinced that if you saw Kate Moss 25 years ago on the street, you'd say that's going to be the one we photograph more than any other. I just don't think that. And I know this from having actor friends, that through the lens, it just does something. Partly because you see, in a model or an actor, you are seeing them much closer than in real life. And so that's particularly true in the movies, and to some degree it's true in the close-up in television. So you get to know these people in a more intimate way than you do even your best friends, visually.
Yeah.
And it magnifies some emotional response to them. So that there's absolutely no doubt I've seen actors who would not be described as handsome that people will swoon about after 2-3 series of something, because somehow they've been taught to love them. But that's part of the answer.
How do you recognise it if you're someone scouting for faces?
Well, I think the other half of the answer is, and I sound really corny at this point, but it's very, very rare you get somebody you can't find a nice photograph of. And if Kate Moss starts off being pretty good looking anyway, and then you apply the world's greatest photographers to her one after the other, and in a model's case, a lot of retouching as well, not necessarily now, but sorry, what's the question?
Well, I think
The defect in her eye, when you look at that, you would say that wouldn't photograph, but it does, and I don't understand.
Is the question, is there such a thing as being photogenic? Yeah. Are some people photogenic and some people not?
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think there is, but I think firstly, everyone is more photogenic than they think they are. I mean, genuinely think that. And people think I'm being kind of nice or flattering. I enjoy taking pictures of people because almost always I can take a picture of them they will like because it's in there.
Yeah,
they're just used to bad pictures of them.
Yeah.
But yes, also there are people who just do pop out. So, and actually Holly Smale, I'm good with names. Do you remember her? From earlier. She, as I said, when she came in, I wouldn't have said that she was going to pop off the camera, but she did. She clearly did. And so there are people who just work very magically, but I think most people work better than they think.
But what is it though? Is it something about the structure of the face, or is it the art of the photographer?
It's a bit of both, but I genuinely think that tastes change and people's familiarity with people. I think, and you can see that through history of paintings in portraiture and stuff, that what people thought was good looking once isn't anymore.
But will you ever walk down the street and go, wow, I've got to take a photograph?
Yes, I do occasionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it always women or is it sometimes men?
No, not both. Yeah.
Just asking.
Yeah. No, very much both.
That gentleman, sorry, was it the gentleman who had his hand or the lady? Sorry. Lady, I'm so yeah. Hello.
I know that when you were photographing your subjects, you actually engaged them in quite a lot of conversation and actually did some quite lengthy conversations around them. But is there anything that came out that was revealing about their character and in relation to the character that they'd actually chosen and some insights into the...
That really would require me to have a memory, wouldn't it?
That was Cambridge's heart, by the way.
I may need some help from Ginny or Kim here. I can tell you some things about... There were really interesting things about storytelling and about why they'd become writers, but specifically about why the characters...
The Terry Pratchett one, that was very interesting.
Yeah, so Terry Pratchett was the Just William.
And the sort of vulnerability of the little boy. I mean, that's just seemed very...
Yeah, so Terry Pratchett, who, as I'm sure many of you know, is not well and has... Is a version of Alzheimer's?
Yes, he has, yeah.
And it wasn't clear to me, I knew that, but I didn't know how it manifested itself with him. And the first thing that happened to me is I walked in and thought, really? Just William with a beard? And I almost wanted to shave it off. Because, that's a good example of what you were saying earlier. I'm trying to capture Just William, and you're giving me a white beard, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing about what he has is balance is a difficult thing. And nobody had mentioned that to me, including his assistant, who's a lovely guy called Rob. Did it again, remembered somebody's name.
Fantastic.
But Rob didn't bother to mention this to me. And one of the things I sort of wanted with Just William was a sort of, I don't know, it's a boyish thing, and I sort of said, just lean back, and everything I asked him to do was in danger of toppling him completely. And it was only halfway through that Rob came and said, one of Terry's things is he can't actually balance very well. So he stopped doing that. But yeah, so what was your thought, Kim, that he
Well, I just think he so enjoyed having a catapult and
being a boy,
going out in the garden with the chickens and all of that. I just felt that
Actually, you're right.
brought out a side
Yes, because when he talked a lot about his... Because one of the things we did, we interviewed them about why they chose their character, but also why they became writers and why they wanted to work with the Story Museum and do all this. But one of the things he remembers very particularly, his boyhood is very, very important to him, and it's particularly important to him because he came from a relatively ordinary background in a toughish school where his teacher said, you know, the classic, you're not going to make much in life. He made rather more than the teacher in the end, I suspect. But his sort of freedom once he left that environment was very important, and I think therefore for Terry that those years are very important. I imagine that's a link to that. Sorry, does that answer the question? Ish.
You've spoken about looks and you've spoken about like telling a story. How important is attitude? Do you maybe think that's the most important? Like he wanted to be a child.
Yeah. So that's a really good question, I think, and
it is, because it goes
yeah.
back to Kevin Spacey a bit, doesn't it? You know, what the attitude somebody brings to the party.
Yes, and I want to answer that in two different ways. One is going back to Will's thing about models. I actually think it's attitude that models bring, and it's attitude both in we're going to do it and make it work, and two, I can give you an attitude now if you want one. But your second point, I think, is really, or the other answer is attitude. Do you mean sort of attitude to the general creative shoot?
Attitude to the whole process.
Yeah. I think that's very, very important, and I think in the end you only get that. A great photo almost always comes out of a joint creativity. I can't take a great photo of you if you're not ready to work with me to make a great photo, and vice versa. If I'm in a terrible mood and whatever, and you're ready to do it, it's not going to happen either. And I definitely... the thing I nearly said earlier is that there was a great photographer, Patrick Litchfield, who said you're not looking at the photographer's picture of the subject when you look at a picture, you're looking at the subject's reaction to the photographer.
Yes.
And I think that's very important, and in a sense, that two-way process, that's why you've got to be happy to work good with people, because that's actually where the magic happens. The magic doesn't happen in a little machine with a shutter, and it doesn't happen by Kate Moss being beautiful. It's some magic moment when she works with the photographer that something happens. And that may partly go back to your question as well, I think. So attitude's vital, and it's a really good question.
We've got time for one more question. Lady here.
I was going to ask you about your attitude towards digital photography. You're using digital now.
I am...
And I assume that at some point you used film.
Yeah.
Do you really... I mean, it's continuing debate. Is there any part of you that thinks that in certain circumstances film trumps digital?
Yeah, I mean, I much prefer film. And
What, just aesthetically?
yes, it's...
More tone, the colour, the chemicals.
Well,
give you different colours.
okay, so that's a good... So I'm not... No, it's that I just enjoy the process of working with it. I'm not actually convinced the end result is better. And one of the oddities is when I continue to work with film against the will of commissioners and so on, is that the first thing they do is to digitise your film. So you kind of give in at that point. You go, okay, so you want a digital file, whatever. But what I did do for a while was to have a lovely Hasselblad, old-fashioned Hasselblad, where you look down, and you could put a digital back on it or a film back, and that gave me the best of both worlds. And the reason I don't have it anymore is that I think I realised, in all honesty, at some point that I bought a Hasselblad because my clients thought it looked good. And digital cameras had got so good that I wasn't actually using it. I mean, partly because I do shoot quite fast.
What do you use?
So now I use a Canon. I actually use not the top of the range because it's too big for me, but I use the 5D.
Okay. That's also a movie camera, isn't it?
Yeah. And funnily enough, film is something I've moved into and we're doing in Nashville with this these cowboys.
Hot on the Hills of Anton Corbijn, right?
Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, what a lovely evening. You've been a lovely audience, by the way. Very engaged and engaging. Could you give Cambridge, or Paul, whatever you want to call him, or forget his name altogether, a large round of applause? Thank you very much. Now, I think there are a couple of books there which I had no idea my book was going to be there, by the way, which we would happily sign. Having had no idea that my book was there, if anybody does want it, and I'll happily sign it. The proceeds obviously will go to the Story Museum, and that means Cambridge has to do now as well. Is it fantastic? So if you do want that, we'll just do a little signing. And I think there's some beer and nibbles and whatnot. And thank you very much for coming to this wonderful venue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Just to say that the book is for sale, the book of the exhibition at a special price of £20 for this evening. So is Will's book for the same price. Just to let you know, for any of you that haven't been in to see the full exhibition yet, I'm afraid it's not open now, but we are open for a further month up until the 2nd of November, so you must come back and see it in all its glory before we close down for the winter. Speaking of winter and into Christmas, I've got some quite exciting news, which is that we've been working away behind the scenes, and asking all of the wonderful writers and illustrators and storytellers involved in the project to sign the book. And we have a limited edition of books that are signed by all 26, including people like Terry Pratchett, Philip Pullman, Michael Walpurgo, and all these wonderful people. So these are available for sale. If you'd like to add your name to the list, we've got a list there at the book table, and they will be ready in time for Christmas at a special price of £260. Now this is money that will go straight to the Story Museum, so it is well worth doing, and it will make a lovely gift for people in a special case as well that we're having made to present them in. So, just to let you know, you can add your name to the list, and we'll have a book ready for you in time for Christmas. Okay, you've been a wonderful audience. Thanks very much, and thanks once again to Will Gompertz and to Cambridge Church. Thank you.